Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Fairway Performance Podcast. Today I have an exciting guest coming to us from Las Vegas. Although he doesn't sound like he's from Las Vegas, he's an import. And a guy by the name of Adam Young, who is the author of The Practice Manual, which is a book that I have and I'd love to show it to you right now, but I've actually loaned it to a friend. And co-host with John Sherman on the Sweet Spot podcast, which is... there we go. It's got the practice manual right there. And yeah, so co-host of the Sweet Spot, which is a really good and informative golf podcast, which I've listened to lots and lots of episodes of. And I highly rate it and recommend it for you guys to listen to. So did you want to say a quick hello, Adam, and introduce yourself, and we'll rip into some questions?
Yeah, you started off by saying I'm an exciting person to have on your show, so I got a lot to live up to.
Mate.
I don't consider myself exciting, but I consider myself very structured, organized, and that's what I've done a lot of my content on, is how to organize, how to create plans, things like that. That's why the book that I wrote, The Practice Manual, is all about practice planning, because the questions that you sent me over beforehand. You said most people don't have a process. Most people just wing the whole process of improvement. And so having some certain structures, whether they're basic or much more elaborate that I can go into, really will help guide people and speed up their journey effectively. A little about me. I know you said you wanted that. I usually don't listen when people ramble on about themselves too much, but I suppose, if you're looking for why you should listen to me, I'm an instructor who has dealt with the uber technical. I was a Leadbetter instructor, a director of Leadbetter instruction in Europe at one point, or at least in the Spanish facility that I was at. So that's, very swing-oriented positions, the 10 Ps, or we had what we call the 11 links. So, you go position by position and you have to know exactly where people are. So I understand the technical elements of it, but I'm also, through experience and just logic, basically understand that there's a lot of players on tour that don't follow a model. They don't look like a model. And so for me, it's always been kind of siphoning out what are the important elements of a golf swing and what's more open to interpretation, and also what else we can improve. There's just making your swing look good is only one element of improvement, but there's other things like the psychology aspect, or a big thing that I do is skill development. And so, if I was to give a brief definition of between skill and technique, what is the difference between them? Your technique is the movement, what you are doing effectively. And the skills are abilities. So an example of this would be your ability to shoot a gun, right, and hit your target. The closer you can get to your target, the better skilled you are. Now, the technique is the method that you're using. So two extreme examples would be one person using a standard shooting technique and another person bouncing on a trampoline while doing it. So obviously the one bouncing on the trampoline is going to be, they might be the same skill level. They might be just as good with a gun, but they're using a technique that's worse. And so I'm always looking at a player and I'm saying, what's their technique here and what is their skill level, and trying to improve both of those things. So, if someone comes to me and they say, well, I'm a 20 handicap, and I look at their swing and I say, well, yeah, that swing looks like it's a tour player's swing, then I know they need more skill work. Whereas if someone says, well, I'm off a scratch handicap and I can't get better, and I look at their swing and it looks like a 30 handicap swing, I would say, all right, this person needs a bit more technique work. So that's how I kind of separate those out. But yeah, I mean, my stuff is very skill heavy because there's such a lack in the industry of skill based interventions.
Yeah, cool. Did you, before we go into any other questions, just on that, did you have any examples of the skill-based stuff? What's a quick example you can give for that for golfers?
Yeah, so a skill, a technique at first would be something like, how much are you turning your shoulders? Are you shifting your weight a lot? What is your grip, the setup that you have? Your posture is a technique. Where your right arm position is throughout the downswing, whether you shallow the club, all those things are movement, they're techniques. A skill would be something like, what's your ability to hit different parts of the face? Now, obviously, they're tied in together, but something like that, a skill of being able to hit different parts of the face, I could make two videos of someone's swing where someone's hitting the toe and someone's hitting the heel, and the swings would look identical. In fact, most of their 3D biomechanical data would look identical. So there could be a big separation there. But yeah, you can build these skills. So for example, if I ask a new player, can you hit 10 shots out of the toe side of the club for me, and then 10 shots out of the heel, I can gauge how skilled they are based on their ability to do that. Now I can progress people through skills, and I have players who can actually move the strike across the face in 5mm increments. So that's how good you can get at this. I've got a quad that measures it to the nearest millimeter, and I can say to a player, give me 5mm off the toe, and they'll get within a window, an acceptable window around that. Or I might say, give me between 0 and 5mm on the heel, now 5 to 10mm on the heel, and they can do it with like a 90% success rate. I'm very close to that skill level as well. So, your ability to do these things can progress over time. And what I found is that, I know a lot of people listening to this are thinking, well, why on earth would I want to hit off the toe or the heel? That's a bad thing. Well, there's a lot of information, a lot of research coming out on something called differential practice. Whereas if you practice hitting toe and heel, so the either ends of the spectrum, you actually improve your ability to hit the center. And I've done this test with golfers very early on in my career, before I even knew what it was called, differential practice. And I took one group and I asked them, right, hit shots out of the toe, hit shots out of the heel. And I took another group of golfers and asked them to only hit the center of the face. Now, you would think that the golfers hitting the center of the face would improve the most after a week. It was the opposite. The golfers who tried to hit toe and heel, the wrong parts of the face, they improved more. So it's a real paradox, or it really flies in the face of that perfect practice makes perfect mantra. Because these ones hitting toe and heel, they weren't practicing perfectly by definition. They were actually exploring, playing around with variants of the skill, and they improved the most. So those are skill building exercises and examples of skills. Another example of a skill would be, what's your ability to present the face more open or closed in precise amounts? Or another skill would be, a more advanced skill would be, can you change your path? Can you make the club swing more left through impact and more to the right through impact? So that would be something that allows you to shape shots differently. So not a vital skill, but it's certainly an example of a skill.
Yeah, cool. I love all that. That's super helpful information. And although I do know lots of golfers who can hit the toe and the heel, and they still have never located the center of the face, no matter how many times they hit the side of it.
Doing it accidentally versus doing it intentionally is very different. But yeah,
100%. Yeah, and just what you're saying there, that comes down to like any sport, and the process that people go through when they're doing that is called deliberate practice. And I'm sure you've heard that term before, where we've got a clear stretch goal, and that's to hit the toe or the heel. We have immediate informative feedback, so we'd have like a place on the face that we see it hit, whether it's via like a strike spray or some other medium, like a quad, like you were saying. And then we do focus repetition, so we go over and over and over trying to do that thing. So that's how like skill is acquired, like you're talking about. Cool. So one of the things that I really wanted to bring up first, and I know we can probably talk the whole episode about this, but essentially an issue that I come across a lot is golfers are very hesitant to get into training because they feel that if they put on muscle, it's going to change the technique of their swing. And they fear that, it's going to change all the mechanics and shit's just going to hit the fan and they're going to be a completely worse golfer because of it. How do you navigate changes for people? And I know when I've messaged you or emailed you the questions for the podcast, I sort of used the Bryson bulk as an example. That's a very extreme one. But most people are obviously making small marginal gains in their fitness and strength. And like, how do they as they're improving their fitness and strength and their physical capabilities, how do they adapt their swing to that? Have you got a process for that and some examples there?
Yeah, I think this goes to the difference between instructing and coaching. Depends how you define these things, but most instructing is just, you've got this fault, let's fix it. So that's one way of approaching it. What I like to do with all my players is train them to be able to coach themselves effectively. So what I train them to do is to be able to identify the fault that's occurring, and this does link strongly to your question, by the way. Identify the fault that's occurring, and it's always an impact fault. So when you hit a shot that you do not like, it is an impact fault. There's something has happened through the impact where the club has contacted the ball that needs to change. Then build tools to be able to influence those things. And so I talk a lot in my podcast about what we call the big three. So the big three are the usual things that change when, as you put it, shit hits the fan. So what are they? Well, if you're having a bad day of golf, it's going to be ground contact error. So you're either hitting fat or thin. You're basically not hitting your spot on the ground. A face contact error, so you're not hitting the sweet spot. It's either going to be toe or heel. Or a directional error. The ball's going to be too far left or right. So those are the big three that you need to monitor. And then what I do with players is I get them to build tools for each one of those three. So all my players who have worked with me for a long time, who have done online lessons with me, or have done my online programs, they all know how to make the ball go more left or right, how to hit more toe or heel, and how to hit the ground farther forwards or deeper into the ground. So that if you have those tools, those 6 tools effectively, you can fix 95% of your issues on the course, if not more. And so, when someone has those tools, any swing changes they make in the future, it's much easier to recalibrate what they're doing. So say, for example, you get a guy who's done a Bryson bulk and now his body is completely different. Well, yes, that might affect his play. But what is it affecting? It's going to be affecting one of those big three that I talked about. So if that player is just bulked up, now can identify which of the big three has changed and has a tool to be able to recalibrate it, there's no issue. That player is going to just benefit from any swing changes he makes, benefit from the bulk because he's now got more swing speed, and so he can recalibrate things. So, typically someone might add bulk and then they start shanking it or something, not immediately, obviously, but a month later, 2 months later, they might start shanking it. Well, if you have the ability to move the strike more towards a toe, it's not going to be an issue for you. You can quickly recalibrate yourself. And that goes towards any swing change. Say, for example, I'm trying to put someone in a different position at the top of their swing. The player who has those tools to be able to recalibrate impact is going to make that top of the swing change quicker. Because, we've all had that experience where we get into a prettier position at the top, exactly where we want to be, perhaps, and then we start hitting it worse. But again, that player who has that process that I talked about, they get into the better position, they start to hit it worse. We can identify, well, why is it hitting worse? Are you hitting the shank? Okay, now we can recalibrate that because we have the tools available. So this is where skill work and building those tools supports technical work as well, or even physical training.
Yeah, I love that. It's making the complex, like making the fact that we've changed our body, like, cool, we're starting to make some sort of a error here in our swing, but it's one of these three, and these are the ways that we know how to fix it. So I think that's a really good way because it empowers your students to learn and adapt and make changes on course really easily. You mentioned, obviously, just before the strike on the face, like hitting the sweet spot, you practice that by doing some toe and some heel shots. What's one for like a skill development if we're hitting it fat or thin? What's something that you work on with clients there?
So this is a good one because there's so many routes you can go with it, so many options, which is actually a good thing. I like options because it opens up more possibilities, more potential solutions. Effectively, people sometimes see options as, oh, no, how am I going to navigate this? I see options as, oh, there's more potential solutions. So, for example, if you're hitting it fat, basically that just means you're hitting the ground too early. So we have two ways to change that. You could shift the low point of your swing farther forwards. So if you think of, for people who don't know what low point is, if you think of the club head as taking a circle around your body, you swing the club head back, you swing the club head down, and it makes a circle around your body. Well, on that circle, towards the bottom of the arc, the club is traveling down, 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 down. Then it reaches the bottom. We call that low point. And then it starts traveling back up again on the follow through. So yeah, that low point position, if you shift that forwards or more towards the target, effectively that will move the ground contact forwards as well. So that is one way of fixing fat shots. Now you can do that through a technique change. I could tell someone, okay, move your body differently. So if, for example, if I get 100 golfers and I ask them to shift their weight more forwards, they're going to shift the low point forwards and the ground contact's going to shift forwards. So that's an example of a technique change. Or I could use an intention-based change. So this is more of a psychological one. So I could just ask that person, try and hit the ground farther forwards. And you'll be amazed at what your instincts can do. So say, for example, I used to get on concrete, and I used to grab an old club that you don't mind scratching up, and I used to draw with a marker pen on the concrete a little dot, and I would say to someone, try and hit that dot. So when you hit the concrete, it makes a little chip, and so you can see exactly where you hit the concrete. And inevitably, the first time someone makes that swing, they hit probably 6 inches behind the spot. So they're trying to hit that black spot on the ground and they hit 6 inches behind. So there's a mismatch between what they're trying to do and what they actually do. Mismatch between feel and real. Yeah. Now, again, I could take a technique approach and ask them, shift your weight forwards, and that contact with the ground would move forwards. Or I could just say to that person, can you spend some time trying to hit too far in front of that spot for me? Try and hit 6 inches in front. And then I'll go off and come back 5 minutes later, and inevitably they've figured out how to do it. And then I say, right, intentionally hit 6 inches behind. Now do 4 inches in front, 4 inches behind, 2 inches in front, 2 inches behind. So they're actually building a scale here. They're understanding, they're learning, what 4 inches in front feels like and what they have to do mentally to achieve that. Now, obviously, as they're going through that process, their swings are changing. One of my favorite things to do is to video their swings and ask them to do this task and then show them a before and after of their swing. And it's amazing. I had a guy the other day who's, he's always had an early release, we call it casting, an early loss of lag. And he's never been able to change it directly. And I just did this concrete drill with him, asking him to hit too far in front. And all of a sudden you see this beautiful lag, this much later release, something he's tried for years to get and never could. And this drill, this exercise based on intent, allowed him to do it. And when I asked him, were you thinking about your movement to do that? He said, no. I was just thinking purely of the task, just focused fully on striking my spot on the ground, and the movement, we call it self-organized around that task.
Yeah, that's amazing. How did he feel after that? He probably absolutely flushed a few and felt pretty good about it, right?
He was amazed at the change in the technique. He was a little upset that he had spent all these years trying to hold the lag and trying to do a later release and never could. And then all of a sudden this drill had done it for him like that. So he was upset that he hadn't tried these things sooner. And then, when we went and tried that on with a real golf ball and asked him to feel, he was constantly hitting 2 inches behind. So in order for him to hit his spot, he had to feel 2 inches in front of the ball. He had to imagine hitting 2 inches in front, and the immediate effect on the strike. I had my launch monitor there as well, so I could see numbers like angle of attack change, arc depth change. So all these positive things changed for him, and the strike quality was much better. The ball was more compressed, things like that. So yeah, he was very happy with that.
Yeah, amazing. One thing that's just come up there is I can't remember where I heard this, but Just speaking about low point and you talking about where the low point is, if we're hitting with different clubs, is there a particular position that we want that low point to be? Obviously, with the driver, we want a positive angle of attack and we want to be able to hit up on the ball so that we get less spin, higher launch, and obviously it's going to spin less and go further, travel further. With a wedge, however, obviously we want to impart some spin on the ball, so we want to be hitting it at a slightly different angle. So I've heard, and I don't know if this is correct or not, but with an 8-iron, we want to hit the ball and then hit an 8-centimeter divot after it. With a 9-iron, we want to be 9 centimeters, like it's going down at the ball. Is that correct, firstly, or have I been misled?
No, you're right.
What is there?
Yeah, you're right. For irons, the low point is going to be more in front of the golf ball. I don't think there's an exact number that you're looking for where that low point is, but I actually just use angle of attack on my quad to see if it's in a decent range. So, with a 7-iron, for example, you're looking for the angle of attack to be about 3 degrees on the downswing to maybe 8 degrees on the downswing. There are examples of outliers of that, but you don't want it to be too shallow. So low point location and angle of attack are tied in together. The more your low point of your swing is in front of the ball, the steeper the club is going to be traveling as it hits the ball. So it's a good indication of low point. And with a driver, we want the opposite. As you said, we want to be hitting up on the ball. You don't have to, but if you want optimal launch conditions for distance, then you do. You want to be hitting up on it. I choose to hit up on it. I tend to fly the ball farther when I do that. And so if we want to hit up on it, we need the low point of the swing to actually be behind the golf ball. So you think the club is traveling down, 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 down. It reaches the low point. Then it starts traveling up into the ball. So the low point's behind it. Lots of that can be achieved by setup alone. So ball position. This is why we put the ball more forward in our stance with the driver, because it's then more in the forward part of the arc. And with irons, wedges, we put it a little bit farther back in the stance, so it's less forwards. We may even change body tilt, and there are other mechanical ways to change angle of attack and low point position as well. But yeah, in general, those rules apply. Irons, you want to be striking as the club is working down, and driver, you want to be striking as that club is working back up again.
Yeah, cool. And just to be completely selfish on this next question that's sort of come up for me is I'm doing a lot of practice in my backyard at the moment because, as we talked about before, I've got a son. I'm in between clubs at the moment and I'm joining another club, so I don't have anywhere to practice. So I've got myself a net. I've got a Garmin R10, which is a really good machine for under $1,000. And I'm, using different metrics and stuff, which we'll get into later, face the path and all these different things. But I want to know about spin. One thing that I've been wondering is, as I hit 3-iron, obviously there's a certain amount of spin on it, and then as it goes up in the clubs, wedges are 7,000-8,000 or something fairly high. What are some numbers that people can be aiming for, or some little windows that we can be aiming for? You gave the angle of attack window for a 7-iron, 3 degrees down to 8 degrees down. Is there one for spin?
For spin numbers, it's changed recently because, over the last 10 years, there's been a dramatic change. It used to be the rule that whatever iron you have, times that by 1,000 for your spin. So if you have a 7-iron, you're looking at about 7,000 RPMs of spin. But that is based on Hogan era clubs maybe, or, using Balata balls. Now we're using balls that are much lower spinning. And we're using game improvement clubs that are lower spinning as well. The center of gravity is different. And so, you get much less spin on modern irons. I see 7-irons, even my own 7-iron spins probably about 4,500 RPMs. I'd say, if your 7-iron drops below 4,000 RPMs, then that's too low, really. You're gonna struggle especially with the longer clubs then. So the things that influence spin, swing speed, the more speed that you have, the higher the spin rate is going to be. So you'll tend to see higher speed players will have much higher spin. And club design as well, ball design as well. And then mechanically, things like angle of attack and loft. Those are two big things. So we call that spin loft. So the angle of attack is whether you're hitting down, level, or up on the ball. So what your club is doing through impact. So with irons, we want that club to be traveling down, I said, between 3 to 8 degrees, something like that with a 7-iron. And then, so you got the club traveling down, and then you have the loft component of the club. Yep. How much loft is being applied. So you've got a vector for the loft as well. And the difference between those two, the difference between the loft vector and the angle of attack, that is what we call spin loft. And this is why different clubs spin more, different clubs spin differently. Because when you get a 3-iron, what happens is the loft comes down and the angle of attack tends to get shallower. And so you have less spin loft, less of a gap between the two. So the ball comes out with more speed and less spin. That's what creates extra distance. And then when you get a wedge, the angle of attack usually gets steeper and the loft increases. So that gap gets bigger, and that's what makes the ball spin more and essentially fly farther.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are things you can do. Those are things you can look at manipulating. Yeah.
Yeah, you talk about some of that stuff in the book as well. And one of the things I see people stuff up with this is they'll change the loft on a wedge by having the ball further back in their stance or some other way, like tilting their wrists forwards or whatever, and they hit down on it so steep, and they think that by hitting down on it so steep and having such an angle of attack and also turning the club, it's going to grip more and spin more, and then they're disappointed when it doesn't obviously spin as much because they've just essentially turned it like more towards a 3-iron, right? Rather than a wedge.
I mean, if you were able to isolate these components, so if you took a wedge and literally just hit down on it more, then the ball would spin higher if you kept the loft the same. The problem is when people try and hit down on it more, usually they also de-loft it, and I've seen people even spin it less when they're trying to hit down on it. So spin is more product of the difference between those vectors than it is any one component. It's pretty 100%. Hard to change spin loft, actually. There are ways of doing it, definitely, but it is quite difficult to change spin loft in a player. One of the biggest influences on spin loft is whether a player is more draw-shaped player or a fade-shaped player. So, it tends to be, all else being equal, that if a player is fading it, they tend to be a higher spin loft player, and if a player is drawing it, they tend to be a lower spin loft player. That's why usually a draw goes farther. Now, there are obviously things you can manipulate with driver fitting to make that not true. Like a Bubba Watson was a fade player, but he had a very low spin rate. So you can change the club head design. You can reduce the loft on the club as well, so you can bring that spin rate down. So it's not a kiss of death for faders of the ball that they're always going to spin it high. There's lots that you can do with a driver to change that spin rate.
Yeah, and it's funny what you were saying before. The faster you swing at it, the more it's obviously going to spin. It's why watching, baseballers and cricketers, as we would know from our parts of the world, they come in and play golf and they've just got this like over-the-top swing path or like a chopping swing path at the ball. And because they have such good kinematic sequence from their sport of baseball or cricket, and they know how to hit a ball and make good contact, they just don't know having the face open or closed, and they just hit these massive slices that go from 3 fairways over because they just hit so much spin on the ball. So just made me think of that. Cool. The next thing. So you're talking about the 3 things before which are going to affect what we do to adjust our swings. What are some data points within that? So I know you started talking before about face to path, and we've talked about spin loft and things like this. When making swing changes for a golfer, if we're not looking at the technique of the swing and how it looks, but we're looking at the impact position and maximizing that or making that look really nice, what do those metrics look like? And what are some examples, or what do you look for in golfers?
Yeah, I mean, some of these things you'd need a launch monitor to get, but in terms of the big 3, you don't actually need a launch monitor for this. You can use some face spray or some Dr. Scholl's foot spray or Dactaring in the UK. I don't know what's over in Australia. But yeah, a little bit of face spray that you spray on the club face, and then you can see the strike on the face. So I would say that if you took the grooved part of the face and you split that into 3, you're looking at hitting the middle third, really. That's a decent range. Now, as you get better and better, you might want to split that face into 5 areas, so 5 segments. So you'd want to hit the middle 5th effectively. Or when I'm practicing, I use a GC quad and it gives me millimeters. So, if I'm with a tour player or a really good a professional that's looking to get better, we're looking at making no more than 4 millimeters either side effectively of the sweet spot. So scratch players maybe 7 millimeters either side or so. So yeah, those are the strike numbers that I would look for. In terms of ground contact, you can measure that just by taking your spray again and spraying a line on the ground and placing the ball on top. And then when you make your swing and you make a divot, you're looking for that divot to start on that line or even slightly in front of it, up to an inch in front of it. Depend on how much cushion you've got underneath the ball. So if your ball is tight, close to the ground on like a tight links course, you're looking for that divot to start very close to the ball. And if it's on a more fluffy parkland course, you might have a shallower divot that starts an inch farther forwards or so. But the divot's gonna basically start between an inch in front to on the line of where the ball is. You'll get away with hitting an inch behind. That would be like a pro mistake, but you don't want to do that too often. You won't get away with hitting 2 inches behind. You'll start to get some really funky results, some real funky inconsistency. And I have players who come to me and they say, I'm inconsistent. And we look at them and they're consistently hitting 2 inches behind. They just get away with it off certain lies and they don't on other lies. So they're consistently poor in that regard. So yeah, I'm always looking to improve, make sure that ground contact is much closer to the ball. In terms of direction, I use a finger system. So you measure, whether a ball is 2 fingers left or 2 fingers right. So you'd hold up your eye, kind of like the aim point putting system. You just say, I've just expanded that out to long game. So it's just a way of measuring, kind of like artists do this to measure distance. And so, yeah, if you have a ball that goes 2 fingers to the right or left of your target, that's okay. That is very much within acceptable boundaries. So lots of players will hit it offline and they'll be upset, and I'll go, no, that's 2 fingers left. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. That's a tour level miss, effectively. Tour players are not as good as you think. That kind of feeds into expectations as well. For reference, each finger represents around about 5 yards with a 7-iron for most people. Obviously, it depends how far you hit your 7-iron, how long your arms are, how thick your fingers are. But I'd say that's a good baseline. So if you're 10 yards off line with a 7-iron or 2 fingers left or right, that's not a bad miss. That's 30 feet, which is like tour average proximity. So yeah, that's what I would look for there. If you're looking at using for directional dispersion, if you're looking at using launch monitors, I know you mentioned you had the R10. Yeah. I don't have numbers for higher handicap players, but I would say when I'm working, if someone says to me, look, I want to really become as close to pro as possible, I would say 5% away from your target is what a pro would achieve in practice. So, what that means is at 100 yards, 5% is 5 yards away. So they're going to be 15 feet away from 100 yards on average. That's going to be their standard deviation. Now, this is in practice. On the actual course, they're going to be much farther away than that. It's going to be closer to like 20, 25 feet because there are more variables on the course. But if you're on a range stock environment, 5% is a good way to go for a tour pro. 7% for a scratch player. So, 7% is 21 foot average at 100 yards. Or if they're hitting to a 170 yard target, about 36 feet, something like that. So you could scale it out from there. You might say to get the single figures, you got to average maybe 9% away from your target, something like that. So you can start to scale it out from there. But those are the numbers I'd be looking at directionally. What else we got? We've done ground contact, we've done face contact, we've done face direction. So those are the big 3.
Yep.
There are actually 7 impact variables that control the outcome. We talked about angle of attack earlier, so that's one of the 4 as well. So for angle of attack, with an iron, you're looking at 3 to 8 degrees on the downswing. There are outliers there. If they're outliers and they can manage it, I'm fine with that. Like you get a Brooks Koepka, he might be 8, 9, 10 degrees down with a 7-iron, but why are you going to change that? He's great. I don't like to see too shallow an angle of attack. If I get a player who's hitting irons and their angle of attack is 0, they're not very versatile from different lies. They might be great from a fluffy lie on the fairway, but you stick them on a hard pan lie, you stick them in pine straw, you stick them in rough, you stick them in a fairway bunker, and they're awful. So I don't like to see 0 angle of attacks with irons, really. Yeah. And then with a driver, I look for 0 to 5 degrees up is good. A good range to go for. Again, if I have a player hitting 3 degrees down and they're bombing it and hitting it straight, I'm not going to change it. Loft will be player dependent. There's no optimal number for loft, but if a player's hitting it too low and their spin is too low, we're going to increase the loft. If a player's hitting high ball, moon balls, or just spinning low, we're going to find a way of reducing the loft. So it's very player dependent. There's loads of variables there. Swing path is another variable. So lots of players will understand this, whether they're swinging more out to in or to the left or in to out to the right. That is not important to be zeroed out. As a 0 would be where the club is not moving into out or out to in through impact. It's just going straight down the line towards the target. It's not important to be zeroed out. But I don't like to see huge ranges either side of it. So if a player comes to me and they're swinging 10 degrees left, they might be hitting this big old fade that lands onto the target, but they're also going to be losing a lot of distance by doing that, because anytime you cut across a ball that much, you're going to be losing some energy transference into the ball. So we then have to weigh up, how good are they at hitting their target versus how much distance they're losing. Again, if they're a tall player doing that, you might say a Bruce Litschke. He's a player from like about 30 years ago or so. He was a very good fader of the ball, and he could repeat it over and over. He would go out and win tournaments. You're probably not going to touch that player. Whereas if it's a 20 handicap slicer who's only hitting the ball 150 yards and they have the potential to hit 250 yards, we're probably going to want to neutralize that overly left swing path tendency. Similarly, if you've got a hooker of the golf ball, someone who's swinging 10 degrees in to out and they're hitting this big old hook onto the target. Again, if they can repeat it, okay. But usually in the case of a player who's swinging in to out, they also tend to have ground contact issues. So we might say, look, if they're hitting lots of fats and thins, we might want to change the swing path for that reason. So there's lots of things, ways of how these things tie in. So we've done ground contact, face contact, face direction, swing path. We've done angle of attack. We've done dynamic loft. The only thing we haven't done, the 7th impact, and they're not in any specific order, is speed, which is something you'll probably deal a lot with. So yeah, ideally, all else being equal, the more speed, the better. Obviously, there might be a case where if I ask an individual golfer to give me 100% for these next few drives, and they pick up 20 yards, but they start spraying it everywhere, we might say that, look, swing speed training to increase your baseline for sure, but there might be a better playing speed for you. So that's how, if you're doing overspeed training, for example, you might be looking to take your swing speed from 100 on the course to 120 max, but your playing speed might be 110. So still 10 mile an hour above baseline, but it might be 10 mile an hour below what you're capable of doing. So, we'd use stats to determine what's best for a player. So sorry, I've gone on a long old rant there, but we've covered the 7 impact variables, right, the ranges of acceptability for them, and how to kind of quantify it as well.
Mate, that was good. That was absolute gold. As you're going through that, I was just like taking mental notes the whole way through. So
yeah, you might have to go through again and pause.
Yeah, anyone listening to this, like rewind and write these down. Yeah, lots of good stuff there, and particularly about the about the speed thing. Like it's one of the things I talk about all the time. Just because you have speed doesn't mean you have to use it, but you have the potential to use it if you want to. If you practice it and you know that you're going to be, 4 fingers wide with the driver when you absolutely crush the ball, and you're playing on a links course that has no trees and, there's no spindly, knee-high grass there, like have a crack at it. Why not? You've got the potential, so have a go. Obviously, as the conditions and, different situations arise, you're going to want to change that. And we'll talk about expectation management in a little bit.
One
thing
can
I
actually
want
quantify. Sorry.
Oh, you go, mate. You go. Sorry.
I was going to say you can actually quantify the improvement. So say you did add 20 yards to someone. You ask someone, right, hit as hard as you can, and if they add 20 yards but they miss a few more fairways, you'd say, well, what do I do in this scenario? Is it worth going for it? And in that way, you could create a strategy. You could say, well, look, let's go for this 100% shot if it's a wide fairway, and let's taper down to the more accurate swing when it's a narrow fairway. Or you could even say, like, you could use strokes gained data, which is a mathematical way of quantifying the quality of shots. So Mark Brody, who came up with the strokes gained data, he says that for amateurs, for every 20 yards that they gain, that can be as much as 0.3 of a shot off their scores. So, you could basically imagine if you played off tees that were 20 yards forward, you would shoot a lower score just by shortening the course. So that 20-yard gain in distance, if you were to be as accurate, would equate to 0.3 of a shot each time. Now, if you hit a driver 15 times in a round of golf, you're gaining 4.5 shots just from that 20 yards extra. Now, if you're looking at data and you say, well, yeah, but I'm also missing 2 more fairways around by doing that harder swing. Well, we can quantify that as well. Every time you miss a fairway, for an amateur, it costs you about 0.2 of a shot. So if you miss 2 more fairways, but you hit it 20 yards farther, you've lost 0.4 of a shot. I know people are glazing over now, but you've lost 0.4 of a shot from the rough. But you've gained 4.5 shots from the extra 20 yards. Your net 4.1 shots gained. So in fact, you could hit 2 balls out of bounds and still be positive stroke. So you can really mathematically quantify these things and see whether it's worth weighing these up, and then take it on the course and test it, see if your scores do come down.
Yeah, and I've worked with so many golfers that, they gain the extra 10, 20, 30 yards and, 10, 15, 20 meters for us in Australia, and like immediately their handicaps come down like 4 to 5 shots, from like sort of 20 to 15 or 14 and from 15 to 10 or even single digits. There's so much data to prove it now. We don't, people just need to look at it. And Mark Brody is a great source for it. I had Scott Fawcett on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about the decade system and how to, use our dispersion management. So similar to what I was saying with the 4 fingers before, if you know that you're going to have a 4-finger miss at worst, left or right, with your hardest swing ever at the ball on this hole, and it's the widest hole you've ever played in golf, it's like, why aren't you hitting driver? Unless there's water where you're going to hit it to, then obviously we need to factor that in. But if it's a wide open fairway, then, we've got the metrics in the data to show that that's the club to hit. So the other thing I wanted to know about, we talked about making swing changes and like coaching someone like with a technique and skill sort of component and the 7 different laws you're talking about. How do we do that on the course? Like, how do we take some of that improvement to the course? So what I mean by that is I've had a few on-course lessons, and that's the main part of my game that I've had, help around is on course. And it's about, for me, it was about, picking better targets on the green and having better expectation management around what you're saying before. It's going to be 15 yards away or 21 yards or feet. So how do you help people with the on-course strategy once you've got this data from all the coaching that you've done in a lab, essentially?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, my goal with players is to make them into their own best coach. And so I'm always building tools with players. So it's like, I'm always testing a player and saying, right, do you have a tool to move the strike more towards the toe? do you have a tool to move it more towards the heel? Let's see. I'll give them a test. I'll say, right, hit 10 shots on the heel, 10 shots on the toe. We'll see which one's their weakest. Some players are great at hitting out the toe when they want to, and they can't, for hell, hit it more out of the heel. That player's going to struggle if they're ever on the golf course and one day they're hitting toe shots unintentionally. They're going to struggle to recalibrate it. Similarly, a player, I could ask them to hit it more left, hit it more right. They might have much better control at hitting it more left. And I don't just ask them hit it any amount left. I will give them specific amounts. I'll say hit 6 fingers left for me, hit 4 fingers left, hit 2 fingers left. Now hit 2, 4, and 6 fingers right. And we can actually look at weak spots within that range and say, well, look, you really struggle with this one. We need to develop a tool for this. And again, if a player is really good at controlling how far left they hit it, and they can do it quite precisely, but they're horrible at controlling the open face version, when that player is on the golf course and one day they're hooking it and they need to open the face, they don't have the tools available. So we need to develop that end of the spectrum, really. We need to develop their control in that end of the spectrum. And then when it comes to on-course stuff, it's just implementing those tools, really. It's just being with them and helping them identify, after a shot, for example, everybody quantifies it as, oh, that was a good shot, that was a bad shot. Usually that's how people, or that was a disaster. Yeah. It's one of those 3 categories. Yeah, exactly. And then they may offhand say, oh, I lifted my head or something like that. Well, the first question I ask after every shot was, number one, was it acceptable or not for your expectations? If it was acceptable, good, move on. You don't learn anything from it. It's just a little confidence boost. However, if it fell outside of your acceptable ranges, so, maybe it went outside of 2 or 3 fingers left of the target, perhaps, maybe it dropped 15 yards short, for example, and fell in a bunker, then we'd move to the next phase and say, okay, well, why? Why did it drop short? And as I said earlier, most of these things, 95% of these faults can be categorized, at least technically, in terms of the big 3. So if it dropped short, did you misstrike it? Did you hit it too much off the toe or heel? Or did you fat it or thin it and it dropped short? And if you miss left or right, there's going to be pretty much a club face error. Even when it comes to things like alignment, that's basically, if you misalign your body, you've misaligned the club face, and that's what's caused it to be offline. So you can quantify those things. I then go a step further and I say, well, was it a normal fault or was it an overcorrection? So here's an example of what I mean. Say you hit a shot and you hit it left. Well, a normal fault is it just happened. I wasn't trying to do anything. I was trying to hit my normal shot and it just went more left than normal. However, an overcorrection would be, say the last 2 shots you flared out to the right and this one you try and close the face and you overdo it and hook it left. That's an overcorrection. It's just important to understand that so you can see, what am I doing here? Because if you see the patterns on the course and you say, wow, I've had a lot of missed greens here from overcorrections, that's going to influence you on the next shots. And you're going to say, right, I've got to lower or lessen the dosage of my correction, if that makes sense. So yeah, those would be the technical faults that I would look at: ground contact, face direction, and then whether there was over or under corrections. I have all these on a sheet that I keep as well, so it's easy to keep track of. I'm thinking of making it, or I'm working on making it into an app as well. But sometimes, you're on the course. This is very on-course stuff here. You might strike it perfectly, but the ball still falls in a bunker. Why? Maybe you picked the wrong club. Maybe you misjudged the wind. You've hit it perfectly and the ball falls short and you go, that wind was stronger than I thought. Or maybe you had some fear there. Maybe you're frightened of the back of the green, and so you send it short. Because in the swing you kind of, I'm a little scared, a little tentative through the swing, and you drop it short. I had that happen to me the other day. I thought I had too much club. I held off on it throughout the swing, and I ended up dropping like 20 yards short. And so that's a mental error. That's not a technique error. So then again, I track in the separate table these mental errors. I've identified kind of 6, 7 mental errors that are common that will influence your results, at least. Misjudge of conditions, things like that, misjudging wind, fear, All those sort of things can influence the shot. So at the end of a round of golf, then you can say, this is where I lost my shots today, and you know exactly then what to go off and practice. It's not like traditional stats. Traditional stats tell you fairways hit, greens hit. What are you going to do with that data? Okay, yeah, I'm missing greens. Okay, what do I have to go and practice? Well, do you have to practice club selection? Do you have to practice not hitting shots with fear? Or do you have to practice strike quality? My stats will decipher that for you and give you a clearer direction of exactly what to practice.
Yeah, and again, it comes down to a big thing that my coach worked on was there has to be a target, or there has to be some sort of goal with your shot, first and foremost, because if we don't have that, we can't get immediate informative feedback, and then we can't practice repetitions of that in our practice to get better at that shot or that thing.
Yeah.
So it might be, I'm aiming for the center of the green. There's 10, 15 meters either side of it. The pin's in the dead center. I'm missing a little bit right today, so I aim a bit left. It goes straight, but I'm on a downhill lie, and you've got all these little factors that you can then take away to practice and say, cool, like this was a shot, recreate it, and then start, working out ways using the tools in your tool belt to get better at that thing. So exactly. I love it.
Yeah, one of the things that I do that's different as well is when I'm quantifying direction, I quantify it relative to where you wanted the ball to finish, or even actually where you aimed.
Yeah, like your start line or what you're aiming at, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So, for example, imagine the pin is tucked on the left. I'm a drawer of the golf ball. I tend to miss a little left of where I'm aiming. If I aim at a target on the range, my pattern will be left biased. So if that pin is tucked on the left, I might aim at the right side of the green. And now imagine I hit a shot and the ball lands, it pulls, it hooks, and it lands 5 feet from the pin. Traditional stats are going to note that down as, oh, you just hit a great shot 5 feet from the pin. My stats will decipher out, no, that wasn't a great shot. That was 4 fingers left of where I aimed. So then when you see these, where the ball is finishing relative to your aim, that then allows you to build a better strategy, and it allows you to truly see whether a shot was good or not and what you have to do.
Yeah, and there's a great quote I heard from a friend who's a gym owner over in the States, and it was one that his baseball coach gave to him, and it's, do not accept in victory that which you would not accept in defeat. So just because it landed perfectly and went to the spot, and it worked out great because you had a birdie, you still missed it 4 fingers left. So just because it was a good result for that miss, it was still a miss, so let's fix it and let's work on it. And don't just, walk away. Like there's some learning to take from that. Now, we've sort of alluded to some of the stats just now, like greens, putts, fairways, all that type of thing. What are some, like if you've got them off the top of your head, or some like data or, approximate numbers, like what are, someone who's a scratch handicap versus a 10 or 20 handicap, like what sort of greens in regulation should we be aiming for in a round, or what's some good expectations around that? And what's some expectations around, our proximity to hole and that type of thing?
Yeah, this would be off the top of my head because I don't really keep track of these things. And the reason why is because I don't find them valuable enough. It's nice data to have, but it doesn't tell me what a player needs to improve. I want to know, do they need to improve ground contact, face contact? So I don't even care that really how many greens in regulation someone's hit. I want to know what their faults were on the day, because that's going to tell me more what they can improve. Like if they had 10 greens in regulation, or they had 5 greens in regulation, that's going to come out in the data that I keep. If they're missing greens, that's going to tell me more why. I need to go off and practice ground contact or face control. Maybe they're missing it right or left. So there are numbers out there that you can look at. I think, a scratch player hits about 60% of fairways. So it's very similar to a tall player in terms of accuracy. It's obviously a tall player is just longer. I think it's like 40% of fairways, so maybe a 10 handicap, 10 to 20, something like that. It doesn't go crazy, they're not players hitting 0 fairways really. In terms of greens in regulation, there is a formula out there. I think it's like your score minus 20 times. I'm going to botch it completely, but it is very correlated. You know, the more greens in regulation you hit, the lower your score is effectively. It's very, very correlated. So the goal, just hit more greens in regulation, is very good. Again, you've got to understand, well, when I'm missing greens, why? Why is it? Is it a ground contact issue? Is it a club selection issue? Is it a misjudge of wind? Is it a left or right issue? Because that's going to guide your practice. Knowing how many greens you hit doesn't really do much for you. Knowing what you need to do to increase that number is a better thing to go for.
Yep. Yeah, things like Arcos, I've looked into that a little bit, and I've got a mate that I play a fair bit of golf with, and and with his, it asks him where he misses and you know, calculates all your putts and your fairways and distance and all that type of stuff, and tells you strokes gained, how you compare to your handicap versus the handicap that you want to get to. So in that sense, if you're using something like that, it's cool because you can see your greens in regulation increasing, and because you know like what's causing the greens and misses. So
I use Arcos. I have it myself. Awesome. Yeah, I have Arcos myself. I use it with clients. It's a good starting point, is what I say. So to see your strokes gained, you know, lots of players will say, "Oh, I'm good at putting, and I'm stuck with my driver." And then you look at their strokes gained, and actually for their handicap, they're pretty good with their driver, and they're missing a lot of shots with putts. So strokes gained is a good starting point to tell you what you need to improve, what facet of your game you need to improve. But then you need to dig in deeper and say, well, why? Even with something like putting, you know, knowing that you're bad from 10 to 20 feet is one thing. Or I should say, knowing that you're bad from 5 to 10 feet is one thing. But knowing whether that's because of speed control, read, or start line is a whole other thing. Because like just going off and practicing, you know, I see lots of players who they're bad 5 to 10 feet, and they go off and they practice their mechanics. They go off and they practice, maybe they get a putting rail or something like that, or they get a putting mat and they're practicing the mechanics of their swing, making sure their stroke is really consistent. And I go on course with them and I find that there's nothing wrong with their stroke. They're just starting it on crappy lines because their reading is horrendous. That, or if their read is horrendous, they require a different intervention. You know, the intervention for reading would be to go off, practice random putts. So do one right to left, then next one left to right. And also note down whether you miss on the low side or high side, because that's going to start to inform and change your unconscious reading skills. Or go off and do something like, you know, the systems like an aim point system that helps you with your reading. So yeah, they require different interventions. Lots of people see from the strokes gained that they're bad at something and they go and practice the wrong thing. They essentially waste their time.
Yeah, well, Mark Brody talks a little bit about that in his book. And have you got a chapter on that as well? Do you have about putting and whether you're missing high or low in the practice manual?
Yeah, there's definitely like monitoring whether you're missing high or low. You know, the first thing I would say on a putt is, did you get the speed roughly what you wanted it to? And then the next thing would be, okay, if you got the speed correct, was it high or low that you missed?
Yeah, because a lot of people say that a high side miss is a pro miss and a low side miss is an amateur's miss, but either miss, if it's consistent, is a miss, and it's shit house. let's square that away, you know, like let's tighten it up. So
you want to see them about 50-50. Like you don't want, okay, a high side miss is a pro miss, but if I go off and miss 100% of my misses on the high side, I'm not any better. I want to even that out, because at least you're getting more in the middle of that bell curve there, and you're actually holding somewhere.
Yes, exactly. The hole's getting in the way of where the ball's going. Awesome. The last thing I wanted to ask about was you've got a system for you know, like three things that we're looking for, like contact, etc., heel toe, all that sort of stuff. If a golfer comes to you and like they're just unable to reach the positions that you're trying to get them to reach in their swing, do you go through like are you TPI certified, or do you have some sort of like movement screen that you'll run them through to ensure that if it is a technique change, like you want them to, you know, get their arms higher or come steeper or shallower, whatever the thing is, that you can actually say like, hey, let's quickly check this. awesome, you can actually move in that way. You have the range of motion to do that. Now let's go and implement this thing. How do you sort of navigate that process?
Well, you're putting me on the spot here. No, I'm not TPA certified.
Mate, you've seen a lot more swings than I have.
It is something I want to do. You know, I do learn about the body and things like that. So I'm not completely dumb to that stuff. But, you know, I suppose that goes into the difference between my philosophy and the philosophy of many other coaches, is that most coaches see swing first. Okay, it's like your swing's not doing this. Or this is even how amateurs deal with their own process of improvement. You know, an amateur will say, right, I'm not hitting it great. They then video their swing. They say, right, this doesn't look right. And then they try and change it. And oftentimes the thing they're trying to change has no relevance to their performance, or it may even be detrimental to their performance. So say, for example, you've got a player who has an open face throughout the swing. Maybe they've got a weak grip to start, then they have a really open face. Well, this player is going to slice it to the right. So what do they learn to do over time? They learn to hang on their back foot and swing left. Well, that player videoing their swing, especially if they're not an informed instructor, if they're just an amateur trying to do amateur swing mechanics, they're going to look and say, oh, look, I'm not shifting my weight like a pro. Well, the unfortunate thing is if that player were to go off and shift their weight like a pro, they would top it, shank it, and they'd hit, if they were to contact it, they would hit it right of right. They would hit it way off to the right. So they, you know, there's a cause and effect here. So yeah, oftentimes amateurs are picking things that are of no relevance, maybe things that are in trend at the moment. Maybe it's a series of YouTube videos and they're just going with what's trendy or what's on Instagram. Or it can actually, as I said, have reverse effects on their performance. So I do the opposite. What I do is I say, first, what is the performance we're trying to improve? So are we trying to improve max distance? Are we trying to improve distance control? Or are we trying to improve directional control? And again, strokes gain data is going to lead us to some of that, or the stats that I keep are going to help us with that. So once we've got the area that we're trying to improve, say, for example, it's max distance. They're trying to hit the ball 20, 30, 40 yards farther. Then we can start to say, well, what are the impact variables that this person needs to change to improve that? It could be a physical thing, like they need more swing speed. Right? All else being equal, the faster that club is moving, the faster the ball is moving. But there's also a hell of a lot of inefficiency in a player. Sometimes a player has a very low smash factor. Or they're very efficient smash factor, but their launch angle and their spin sucks. You know, you can get a player, say you get a player who launches at 10 degrees with 4,000 RPMs of spin. That player could pick up 30 yards just by launching it closer to 16 with 2,000 RPMs of spin. So that might be a technical change. There might not be a speed change needed even. And so, yeah, I can look at the data. I can even by eye, I can see whether someone's ball is spinning too much. And then say, right, we need to, for example, increase launch and lower spin of the ball. Then we go to the impact variables that create that. And this player might be hitting low on the face, for example. And we know that when you hit a driver low on the face, that launches the ball lower with higher spin. So I could say, right, so we've got this process now. The performance this person needs to do is increase distance. What they need to do that is to increase launch and lower spin. What they need to do that is to hit higher on the face. Now we have the impact variable that we need to change, hit higher on the face. Now we have options, right? How do I get that player to hit higher on the face? It could be, staying lower in the backswing. It could be as simple as just teeing it higher. Honestly, you could take a player, if they made the exact same swing and you teed it higher, they would hit it higher on the face. Could be that simple. And so, yeah, when we have these different options, I might have 10 different options for an impact variable for a player to change it. And then, I get a good sense of what they could do from their body just by, how they're walking into the lesson, how old they are, things like that. And you get a good sense as well from just asking them to do certain practice swings. I might ask them, can you feel as if you stay a little lower in the backswing, and ask them to do a few practice swings. If they can't, then we might go to a screen. You know, I have guys who I work with who are TPI certified. There's even a medical guy there, and so they can do physical screens as well. But usually I've got several options, and I pick the easiest one for them that has the best effect, really.
Yeah, cool. It's it's one of the things that I like. Is sort of such an old school mentality, and it's great that you are sort of the new age, and a lot of the coaches that I talk to nowadays are. But gone are the days where it's like Adam Scott's swing versus my swing, and it's like the golf coach saying, "Hey, see how he's in this position? I need you to get like closer to here." And you know, this guy's as stiff as a board, and he's just never going to reach that position. Obviously, there's some sort of physical change that he needs to make, and a screening process is going to help with that. Cool, mate. Well, thank you for that. We've just ticked over the hour, so I don't want to take up too much more of your day, although I know you have a day off. I'll let you enjoy that. To appreciate your time, and did you want to share with the audience where they can find out more about you and potentially work with you, or even just learn more from you?
Yeah, I've got loads of learning material. If you go to adamyounggolf.com, and there's a little tab that says Game Improvement Area. I've got free videos on there as well. I've done a load of blogs, like 300 different blogs on different topics. But if you want to dive into the meat of it and get to the improvement programs, I've got something called the Strike Plan, which improves ground contact and face contact. So those are two of the biggest things that are going to improve your max distance and your distance control effectively, as well as get rid of disasters like those days where you're fatting it or shanking it. So the Strike Plan is good for that. If you're a pretty decent player and you're good at strike, but you tend to miss more left and right, the Accuracy Plan is a good one for that. That deals with path and face, which are those two impact variables that create the direction. And then if you're a real golf geek and you want to dive into over 100 hours of content on everything from psychology, impact variables, how to train, strategy, things like that, then Next Level Golf is my program for that. And if you're not someone who likes to listen or watch videos, and you're more of a reader, then I have a best-selling book called The Practice Manual that's available on Amazon. I know if you're in Australia, it's they don't have a printing facility yet in Australia, so it's pretty awkward. They have to ship it from the States, unfortunately. But if you're in the States, the UK, Europe, they've all got printing. It's Amazon who run it effectively. They've got printing facilities there. So, yeah, you can get the Practice Manual, The Ultimate Guide for Golfers by Adam Young.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and I've read that as well. The Practice Manual. I've taken a couple of things out to use in my range net sessions, and it's been super helpful. I haven't dug into any of your content online. It's all been through the podcast as well, the Sweet Spot, which you're the co-host of too. So I'd highly recommend that people go and listen to that. And you get plenty of tips from your co-host John Sherman as well. He's quite a good guy. Awesome. Thanks for your time, mate.
No problem. Thank you, Shaun, for having me on. It was a good discussion. I always enjoy these things.
No worries, mate. See ya.
All right. Bye.